So I recently did a video on signs that you might be over-exercising. And one of the possible signs for someone over-exercising was frequent injuries. But that doesn't mean that I think that over-exercising is always the cause for someone dealing with frequent injuries. Because that wouldn't explain why someone who might be training even harder or more frequently might not experience any injuries as someone who might not be training quite as hard who experiences a lot of those injuries. So in this video, I'm going to help you understand the most common underlying causes for these frequent injuries. We're going to dig into some studies to understand how you can figure out which cause might be causing this trouble for you and steps you can take to improve the situation. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So remember, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving you advice on what to do about your specific injury. I don't know your situation. I couldn't possibly know the right steps for you, but I want to share some studies that'll give you some insights into what you can look at to try and figure out what could be creating this trouble for you. And I'll put links to those studies in the description below this video so you can dig into those a little bit more if you want to. So when we're talking about this overtraining situation, sure, overtraining has the ability to increase the risk of somebody having more injuries. There's some issues that can go on with there, but there has to be reasons why it's going to magnify for some people and not for others. And that usually has to do with some structural weaknesses. And the overtraining itself does have the ability to weaken some of these structures, but we really need to understand why it would really be magnified in some people. And the first thing that we want to look at is low resources. So we'll look at this study here on relative energy deficiency in sports. They call them REDs, and knee injuries. And they were saying that these relative energy deficiencies is usually from low energy availability, which is a mismatch between athletes' energy intake or their diet and energy expended in exercise. This results in inadequate energy to support the body's baseline physiological functions. So one thing that we really want to jump into immediately is to understand that this advice about, you just got to burn more calories than you eat is just about the worst advice out there. You're telling the person that you want to create this deficit so that your body will burn this stored fat, but that's not always how the body works. It's not just about calories in and calories out. It's about the food choices that a person is making and how those food choices cause the body to operate differently. So if someone is just burning up all their fuel, we see here that that can create problems because the body doesn't just need energy for you to do this sport or workout or even just to walk to your car so you can drive to work. The body needs a lot of energy and other resources to run a wide variety of functions that are going on that you don't even know about. All this stuff goes on behind the curtains, but it all has to happen. So this study went on to say that this relative energy deficiency is associated with a reduction in anabolic hormones such as insulin and insulin-like growth factor and an increase in catabolic hormones like cortisol. This has been shown to be detrimental to the repair of post-exercise microtrauma to muscles and tendons. Reduced muscle and tendon strength can result. And they also say that a reduction in anabolic hormones can affect muscle development and tendon repair. So they're looking at different hormones in the body that seem to have either a catabolic effect or an anabolic effect. And the catabolic effect is part of our circadian rhythm, and it's the part where the body is very good at breaking those tissues down. So when our body is breaking down, that's said to be a catabolic effect. And when the body is rebuilding and repairing, that's an anabolic phase. But when we see these deficiencies in energy or this fuel that the body needs, that has the ability to push the body more into that catabolic state. So what we want to understand when we're looking at these different things that can affect what's going on with these injuries is that these low resources are a big deal. So when the body does not have all the resources that it needs, you don't just drop to the ground and pass out. There's issues that could cause somebody to pass out, but that's not what usually happens. When the body doesn't have the resources it needs to function correctly, it's going to get them anyways. If the fuel and the resources that the body needs are not coming into the system, it's going to shop at the 7-Eleven. And the 7-Eleven is you. That means your tissues, your structures, your things that you built up to allow your body to function so optimally. Your body is going to break those down to access the nutrients that it needs so that it can carry out all these functions that it has to function. So these studies are really showing that when a person is depleted in these energy sources, it has the ability to push the body into a state where it starts to sort of catabolize itself. Now that doesn't mean that you constantly need to be eating a candy bar as you run around third base. That's not the way that the body works, but you want the body to be set up so that it's optimized for using the fuel that you're bringing into the body, and it's also optimized to access backup fuel sources when it's needed. So that it's not saying, oh, I kind of got nothing here, I'm going to have to break down tissues in order to do the stuff that this person's trying to get me to do. You want the body to work optimally so that it's not breaking itself down. In this study, they also go on to say that hormonal dysfunction is a hallmark of low energy availability. Anabolic hormones such as insulin and insulin-like growth factor are reduced. This results in reduced glycogen and protein synthesis and impaired repair of muscle microtrauma post-exercise. Cortisol levels are also elevated when there's a lack of energy, promoting a catabolic state that causes these muscle tissues to be weaker. Lower insulin levels also accelerate the breakdown of muscle proteins to sustain blood glucose. These effects can be detrimental to muscle strength and performance. So we can see that when there's not energy available, the body is just going to make that happen on its own. It can easily turn those tissues into glucose so that it has fuel, but in the process of doing that, it's breaking those tissues down and making them weaker. So we can see that when resources are low, it does have the ability to create mechanisms in the body that are going to result in those structures being weaker because they're being broken down and turned into a fuel source for the body to use. So that's one problem, but we also need to understand that there can also be a lack of building blocks when it comes time to repair those structures. Just because the body is breaking things down, we ought to understand that it's going to rebuild those, right? But let's look at this study here that talks about use of proton pump inhibitors and associated with fractures in young adults. And they talk about that PPI use was associated with fracture in young adults, but overall evidence did not support a PPI fracture relationship in children. Young adults who use PPI should be cautioned regarding potentially increased risk of fracture, even if they lack traditional fracture risk factors. So when we're looking at this kind of thing, what we want to understand is that for the body to have building blocks, it needs to be able to break down proteins into elemental nutrients that the body can use. So those elemental nutrients are called amino acids. And we access amino acids by breaking down proteins. The way that we do that is the proteins come into the stomach and then our stomach makes hydrochloric acid or HCl. And this stomach acid is there to acidify that food so that we can break it down and get the nutrients out of that food. But if there's not enough stomach acid there, we can't really access all of those minerals and amino acids from that food that we're consuming. And that's why we see a lot of issues with extended PPI use. And PPIs are a proton pump inhibitor, or they're used for like acid reflux, and their purpose is to turn off that stomach acid to remove that symptom of the acid coming back up. But these studies show that with prolonged use, that the person ends up having weaker bone structures and some of these other issues that can come from the body's inability to access these building blocks. The building blocks are needed for the body to rebuild itself. So we're looking at a study that's showing this when someone uses PPIs, they can create problems strengthening structures like bones. But we need to understand that a person doesn't need to be using PPIs to have that problem. There's a wide variety of issues that will cause a person to have a hard time making enough stomach acid. Most people that are dealing with acid reflux are dealing with that reflux because of a lack of stomach acid. Acid reflux does not come from too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. If this is new information for you, we'll put a link in the description below for our video on how to fix acid reflux. The video will help you understand that there's a triggering mechanism that closes a valve at the bottom of the esophagus so we don't get reflux, but that mechanism is triggered by enough stomach acid. So it's very common today for someone not to be making enough stomach acid. So if a person's dealing with any digestive symptoms at all, that's a sign that the digestive system is not working correctly. There are digestive malfunctions that can restrict your ability to break the food down and get these building blocks that we need to rebuild these structures. So when we're looking at the healing process, when we're doing any type of workout or any type of exercise or any type of sporting activity, those micro traumas happen to our muscles and tissues and connective tissues and tendons and all these things that have to operate for us to be able to run all around and jump about. So we need those things to work correctly and to heal correctly. If they're being broken down when we work out, there has to be a healing process. So that happens by the body moving into that anabolic state. It does this at night. The body gradually moves more and more into that anabolic state, so then the body can rebuild and repair itself. So it first has to move into that anabolic state, but then it needs these building blocks like amino acids to be able to rebuild and repair those structures. So you can see there's a lot of things that can go wrong that would lead to a weakening of these structures and these frequent injuries. If these structures are a lot weaker because they're not being rebuilt or repaired, don't you think it would be a lot easier to create more significant injuries more often? Timing can also be a factor here. Like if somebody's doing like a weightlifting workout type of thing, they're tearing those muscles down so that they can be rebuilt and renewed stronger. So that's what that whole process is about. So if a person's breaking down like say their chest muscles on one day, they're doing a chest workout, and then the next day they do another chest workout, well, they're not putting that timing in their benefit. They're breaking down the muscle again before it has a chance to rebuild and renew. So they just remove the benefit from that exercise. So with a lot of sports and those types of activities, a lot of times a person will really be working that muscle over and over again without it giving a chance to really rebuild and renew. So that can be important when we're looking at the timing of how the body heals. The body needs a chance to do those rebuilding things. So this study on the training load and fatigue marker associations with injury and illness, they say previous research has demonstrated that training and competition stress result in a temporary decrease in physical performance and significant levels of fatigue post-competition. These decreases are typically derived from increased muscle damage, impairment of the immune system, imbalances in anabolic catabolic homeostasis, alterations in mood, and reduction in neuromuscular function. So one thing that they hit on here that I think is very important is to understand that when we're looking at this issue, it's very common to see someone dealing with what's called a catabolic imbalance. Kind of like they were talking about. Imbalances in that catabolic, anabolic, and circadian rhythm that we have. So it was Dr. Emanuel Revici who helped us understand that the body has this natural rhythm at the cellular level, where during the day we should be in this catabolic state where the body is really good at creating energy. It's also good at kind of breaking down so that it can be rebuilt and renewed. That's how the body is renewed. But at night, it should move into this anabolic state where it's very good at sleeping and resting, and that's where it does its repairing and rebuilding. But here's the situation. It's very common for someone to get stuck in one of these states most of the time. Or maybe their body is just pushed way too far into that state. A lot of those activities that the other studies were talking about were saying that they raise these hormones that push the body more into this catabolic state. And we see clients all the time that are really stuck in this state most of the time. I used to be really stuck in this state. When I was stuck in this state, I was an insomniac. I couldn't sleep at all because my body was stuck in the go, go, go mode all the time. Now there's other causes for insomnia, but this is just one possible common one. And the studies that I'm linking below will also show you that a lot of this physical activity is a pro-catabolic event. So doing some type of workout, doing a strenuous exercise session, these things are pro-catabolic activities. They push the body more into a catabolic state. So if a person is doing a lot of those types of exercises or training or sporting events, they may be pushing their body more into this catabolic state. But beyond that, there are also physiological issues and genetics and diet choices and stress and all these things that can also contribute to a person being pushed either too far into this catabolic state or too far into this anabolic state. And a person being stuck in either of these states can create a wide variety of health issues. We really want the body to move back and forth from this catabolic state during the day to the anabolic state at night. And for a lot of people who experience a lot of frequent injuries, for the clients that we see, it's almost always that they're leaning too far on this catabolic side, or they're having some type of digestive malfunction that is restricting their body's ability to access the nutrients in the food that they're eating. So their body doesn't have the building blocks. So it's either that the body doesn't have the building blocks to repair, or it's stuck in a state where it can't really repair. And that's why we have to kind of look at all of these things to figure out what's going on with us. There is no one formula that's going to work with everybody, because these are going to be different situations. But you can see that some people may have a little bit of more than one thing going on. Maybe somebody can digest okay, but it's not optimal. So they have some building blocks, but not as much as this next guy over here. Maybe one person isn't training as hard as another person, but his body is already leaning too far on this catabolic side. So he doesn't need a whole lot of workouts to get him to where his body is kind of stuck in this catabolic state where it can't move into the rebuilding and repairing state. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that that means that if you're having injuries that you need to push yourself as far into this state as you can. We see that when athletes use anabolic steroids, those are things that are pushing a body very far into that anabolic state. And that's why they build muscle faster, but we also know that it creates a wide variety of health issues. I don't think being crammed way far into this state is the beneficial situation to be in either. I also think that this catabolic state is where we're really good at creating energy. And if a body is stuck over in this anabolic state, in this state it likes to create energy through fermentation, which is kind of like a dirtier way to do it, and it's just not as efficient. So I've noticed a lot of times through watching sports on TV that there'll be like this athlete, like in the NFL for example, that he'll be like the fastest guy in the whole league, and he's this amazing athlete, but he's always on the injury report. He's hurt all the time, and I just kind of wonder if they're just really catabolic. Because I wonder, this is not a proven thing, but I kind of feel like if they're really in this state, they're probably more efficient at creating this energy. Maybe that's why they're so fast, but maybe they get injured a lot because their body is always in that breakdown state and they're not moving into the rebuild, repair state enough. So when we're looking at figuring this out for ourselves, we really need to look at our body and what's going on. Do we have digestive symptoms? Are we having other signs of being pushed too far on that catabolic state? So if you don't know how to do those things, if you're new to this channel, we'll put a link in the description for our totally free digestion course. And that kind of walks you through just running simple self-tests at home with tools you can pick up like at a pharmacy and a health food store. And they'll just give you an idea of where your chemistry may be moving. Are you leaning too far on that catabolic side? And if you are, that course will teach you steps you can take to improve that imbalance. But it's not about just trying to move your body in one state without knowing where you are. You don't want to go just off of symptoms. You want to work with your body instead of against it. So when we're running tests at home, these are not diagnostic things, but if we can get an idea of how our body is operating, then we can take some steps to improve any imbalances that seem to be showing up, and then see, does that improve the issue that we're dealing with. And if you do think that you might be overtraining, know that that issue also has the ability to create some mental and emotional issues as well. So you could jump over right now and check out our video on signs that you might be over-exercising. I can't wait to hear about your results.